sorry to keep people waiting, but this room was in use before us, so we just had to move things around. But really honored to welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining, especially people from back home in India. I know it's very late, but love your enthusiasm. So I'll just start with a brief introduction to Oxford Ambedkar Initiative and why we went ahead with sort of forming this organization. The aim was to create an anti-caste culture at the university, and but before that, I think just the logistics. We are recording, so if anyone of you would not want to be recorded, you can drop us an email later, and we can remove your recording from the overall recording. And we are also clicking photos for the people who are in person here. So if you have objections of not wanting to be photographed, you can let the photographer know. So Oxford Ambedkar Initiative, we started this last year. It was me and Dr. Suraj Yengde, who is a DPhil candidate at St. Anthony's College, with an aim to create an anti-caste culture at the university that is reflective of and sensitive towards Dalits and is led by Dalits. We believe that there is a need for recognizing the centrality of Dalit voices in shaping and leading the anti-caste discourse who have lived experiences of caste discrimination. My own introduction, I am Asang Wankhede. I go here at Balliol College. I am a final year, hopefully my final year of my PhD. I study caste and poverty in Indian reservations, and I'm a doctor and a lawyer that way. And so now I invite our panelists to please join us here, or would you prefer? I think here is better. So,
thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just start by introducing, so I'll just give an overview of the format. First, of course, the editors, authors of the book that we are sort of have gathered here today to launch, discuss, will speak. So Hugo will go first, will speak for about 15 minutes. And then Daneshwar, who is here with me, will speak for about 10 minutes. And then we have the discussants, Professor Eleanor, Professor Jens, and what's the name again? It's
Jen.
No, Jen is fine. I think.
Yeah.
No. The other person who's joining us.
Jesus.
Jesus. Yeah. Sorry, Jesus. My bad with the pronunciation. So Jesus will go towards the very last. So now I invite Hugo to please sort of start, and I'm just going to stop sharing the screen so that people can see you speak. Yeah, over to you, Hugo. Thank you. And before that, I'll give you a quick introduction of Hugo. His research is focused on India and on the socio-political mobilization of Dalits. He's professor at the University of Edinburgh, and his research is the basis for his book Untouchable Citizens, which explores the interplay between Dalit movements and democratization in South India. He has also written about Dalit politics, collective violence, identity politics, institutionalization, and construction and negotiation of social space. So it's a privilege to have you with us, Hugo. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Asang. I've just tried to share screen because I have some slides, so you'd have to watch me the whole time.
Sure.
But that's disabled, apparently.
Yeah, I'm just going to make you the host now. So
perfect. Thank you.
You're the host now.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So just do. Let's see. So.
Okay. Can you see those slides?
Yeah, just a minute. I'm just trying to pop it up. Sorry, just a second.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, but
excellent.
Sorry, Hugo, the people here in person, they cannot. Just give me a second.
Okay, yeah, sure. Just tell me when to go.
Yeah, there you go. This guy. Yeah, got it. Yeah, Perfect. Thank you.
The wonders of technology.
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much, Asang, and thanks to Daneswar and to the Oxford Ambedkar Initiative for this opportunity, for allowing us to launch this book. And I'm really sorry not to be there with you, and I hope to be able to meet and interact with all of you on another occasion. Jesus and I were bemoaning the fact it's exam board season, we're doing marking, all the rest of it, so it's difficult to find the time. It's great as well to see so many people online and presumably in the room. Lots of familiar faces, including some of the contributors to this volume, so they'll be able to keep Daneswar and I right if we stray too far from the logic of the book. So I've been tasked in this introduction with setting out the theoretical and conceptual basis for the book. I have 15 minutes, which is not very much, so I'll do my best in that amount of time. And what I want to do is basically give you a flavor of why it is we chose to focus in on experience and effect, and why we felt the need for yet another volume on caste. Our starting point for the volume is Ambedkar's insight that caste is always relational. There is, he says, no such thing as a singular caste. They exist only in the plural number. There is no such thing as caste. There are always castes. What this means is that castes and caste orders are created, shaped, and reproduced through action and interaction. They're not given or static, but emerge in and adapt to particular times and contexts. To fully understand why caste persists first requires us to pay attention to its everyday manifestations. What this entails is a rejection of text-based scriptural understandings, such as those famously offered by Dumont, which present caste as an unchanging and fairly ideologically consistent hierarchy, which is the same across the entirety of the subcontinent. It also departs, and this is something we're indebted to the reviewers for flagging up, from the ethno-sociological accounts proposed by McKim Marriott and colleagues such as Ronald Inden. Now, Marriott and Inden proposed what they called an ethno-sociology of India, trying to draw on local concepts and understandings and escaping from scriptural versions. And much of what they highlight is of great value. They highlight, for example, how people seek to acquire the most appropriate substances for themselves through right eating, right marriage, and other right exchanges and actions. And we don't disagree with any of that. Their focus, however, is on these coded substances that may be incorporated and passed on. Persons, and I quote, may preserve their particular composite natures and powers by stabilizing their constituents and by admitting into themselves only what is homogeneous and compatible. As an aside, if you're creating an ethno-sociology, you might want to make it somewhat more accessible to those who'll be reading it. You see on the right-hand side of the slide a quote from Marriott, which basically says something similar. You know, individual persons absorb heterogeneous material, and individual persons, you know, can basically monitor their own coded substances, essences, residues, and so on and so forth, by monitoring what they take in. Rather than focusing on the substances here, as they do, rather than seeing substances as transmitting anything, we chose to place an emphasis on transactions and interactions between groups and individuals. Ethno-sociological accounts, we say, and agree with several other commentators on this, neglect power, class, and politics, and can end up portraying caste as an inherent substance. And we think that our interpretation and what we offer in the book is actually closer to Marriott's own data than his theory is. Marriott's own data contradicts the notion of caste as essence when noting that a higher caste person may refuse both cooked and uncooked food from a sweeper, but accept grain, which is actually harvested or threshed by a sweeper, if he worked as an employee under a landowner of a caste higher in rank. Marriott concludes, not the substance or the sweeper's touch, but his rank in the transaction is what matters. The concern here, as in most aspects of caste reproduction, is to see that a previously enacted order of castes is reenacted. If exchanges of substance create rank, then such data is hard to explain. Therefore, we stress the processual and relational basis, rather than essence, of caste. In doing so, we're inspired by the path-breaking work of Guru and Sarukkai in their book Experience Caste and the Everyday Social. They note that individuals make meaning of the social, not only from being taught about socialization, for example, but also from experiencing it. Caste cannot be only in the mind, since it appears through the ways we see, touch, smell, taste, and hear. Each of these modes becomes representative of caste. They become the markers and signifiers of caste. Joel Lee's work on the affective dimensions of caste takes this insight further in showing how visceral feelings of disgust can be mapped onto caste orders. Making caste salient in different ways serves to place people and put people in their place. A great example of this comes from Hoff and Pandy's experimental work. In experiments where people are given common problem-solving tasks, they find that all members of a group perform roughly equally. Scheduled caste members of the group may actually outperform others. When, however, the same tasks are offered to them, but the castes of the different participants are clearly flagged up, the performance of the Dalits nosedives. And they highlight that this is because caste is made salient, people are pinpointed, labeled, and isolated as inferior others, which affects their sense of self, it affects their performance, and affects how well they do in the problems that previously they managed so well. Furthermore, Guru and Sarukkai point to the relational and interactive nature of caste. They note how greeting people by folding hands is to politely express unwillingness to touch the other. Shaking hands is already performing a social act, one that's not only driven by social conventions, but also one which reinforces how the social is touchable in various ways. And this was beautifully and powerfully illustrated during the roundtable conferences by Rattamali Srinivasan, Dalit activist from South India, who was introduced to the king and refused to shake hands. When asked why, he said, "My people are seen as untouchable until all of them can shake hands. Why should I be the only one to do so?" Illustrating the ways in which touch is a powerful marker of caste, but also how it can increasingly be subject to challenge. Building on Guru and Sarukkai's work, we also draw on the insights of Vivek Narayan in his recent work. And he uses performance studies to differentiate between caste codes and caste scripts. Caste codes seek to order interaction in ways that make castes legible and, ultimately, governable. They offer rules of right conduct, precepts, prescriptions, proscriptions, and examples of correct usage. Caste codes are typically Brahminical in origin and tend to assert caste. This is how things ought to be done. The interaction between performative codes of conduct, materiality, hence the picture of the village there, and social behavior, he refers to as caste scripts. Caste scripts refer to actual lived experience and social meaning within particular forms of life. The fractious relationship between rule and use, between grammar and meaning, caste codes and caste scripts within forms of life makes language games an unstable practice of contestation. The friction resulting from the code and the script within particular forms of life gives the potential to both assert and reproduce, but also oppose and challenge caste. Caste isn't given, in other words, it is performed and re-performed in specific contexts. And the engaging example that Narayan himself uses is the historical one of Ayangale in Kerala. He starts with this vivid account of this character riding a bullock cart through a crowded marketplace adorned with white cloth and white turban. This is a commonplace occurrence. This is what Nayars and other upper castes do all the time. Ayangale, of course, was himself a Dalit. And suddenly this accepted and routine scene, this normal occurrence became something which was completely unacceptable. People started throwing stones, people started shouting, and he had had the foresight to arm himself to prevent against the injury that might otherwise have befallen him. And Narayan shows how the caste codes can be used in order to challenge the day-to-day reproduction of caste. What this approach of performance also foregrounds is that caste is not the preserve of the oppressed. All too often, when we're talking about caste, we focus on those at the foot of the caste hierarchy. Caste is actively practiced and policed by higher castes. In his introduction, Asang quite rightly noted the need to foreground Dalit voices and perspectives, but I would add the imperative for upper caste allyship and solidarity in this struggle against caste as well, to call on them to stop performing and reproducing the structures that privilege them. And what both these points speak to is the changing context within which caste now operates. Whilst the lens of performance is helpful, therefore, we follow Guru and Sarukkai in stressing experience, and we follow Joel Lee in stressing the affective registers of caste in terms of deep-seated emotions and feelings as well. So take the example up on the slide there. This is from field notes from way back when I did research in Tamil Nadu.
Sorry, Hugo. Can people please mute themselves? Yeah, can people please mute themselves? तुम्ही आपला mute करा video ने audio please.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
so
sorry about that.
thanks, Asang. No. But I mean, there are so many people out there, which is wonderful, but of course that comes with some issues as well. Just pointing to this example here, what you have is somebody a Dalit who lives in the city, has a work colleague from another caste, goes to that person's village, and then comes face to face with the reality of humiliation and naked casteism in the village. Caste codes, in this example, are localized and jar with the everyday experiences of somebody brought up elsewhere, leading to uncertainty, disorientation, and confusion. Caste hierarchies, as numerous studies have shown, are eroding, but the hierarchical values that underpin them remain and can serve to put people in their place, can serve to humiliate them still. Calling Dalit students out to receive scholarships, for example, is a classic way of putting them in their place. Branding, as the example on the slide there shows, branding certain foods as Brahmin, and hence pure, serves to locate them in a particular place. Viewing certain dietary practices, as the brilliant poem on the bottom there shows, as the norm, serve to locate caste and locate people in a particular hierarchical order. So, foregrounding experience, I turn to a final example from my field work where, again, somebody, a college student, a Dalit college student, talks about the subtle forms of caste feeling that he experienced every day. My former student, Suryakant Wagmore, talks about the increasing need for people to practice politeness around caste issues, to skirt away from naked forms of casteism. What you have instead are the tacit rules of the game played out in scenarios such as this. So this person talks about, at college when I got forward to receive my scholarship, it affected how some of them saw me. After that, some of them would refuse to share cigarettes with me. They would refuse to puff on the same cigarette, and they talk about yetchi, saliva, but would drag on others' cigarettes. I had no need for such friends. Some while later, when I met up with this guy, a group of us were drinking, he picked up my glass and finished off the drink in it. Does yetchi matter less when you're drinking, I asked, and he got all tense. Friendships here rest on tacit avoidances, silences, and rules of engagement that can be fraught at times. Caste is increasingly and assertively questioned and challenged, but it persists due to these casted enactments and performances as well, if not more so, than the larger scale associations and institutions which advance a political agenda linked to caste. In this volume, therefore, we move away from structural analyses and understandings for a focus on the experiential and everyday understandings of caste. We detail how caste is practiced in different contexts and by different groups of people. We chart how it operates in intimate spheres as well as in the public domain. And we chart how this institution of inequality is perpetuated through such means. For an overview of the chapters and the insights of the volume, I will now hand over to Daniswa.
Thank you so much, Hugo. I'll reclaim the host. So Hugo, I think you'll have to make me the host again. I'm not able to reclaim the host back, so I think you'll have to go in the chat and Asang Wankere OAI and on the more option. Oh, thank you. Perfect.
Sure.
Thank you. Right. So thank you so much, Hugo, for that. And one thing that was really striking when I was reading the introduction and of course the conclusion, and I promised to read the whole of the book, was how pervasive caste in all aspects of life, and especially sort of how different dimensions and 13 chapters in total and different parts will sort of cover those various aspects of life. So thank you, and thank you for that like, really important introduction. And now over to you, Dhaneshwar. I'm going to introduce you first, and meanwhile I can share screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Got this one. So yeah, introducing Dhaneshwar. He's a lecturer at London School of Science and Technology, and also has been conferred with honorary fellowship at the University of Edinburgh. He's completed his postdoc with Hugo at the Centre for South Asian Studies, Department of Sociology, University of Edinburgh, and his postdoctoral research conducted from 2020 to 2023 for 3 years, focused on higher educational experiences and aspirations of select marginal communities in India and the UK. So over to you, Dhaneshwar, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Asan, inviting me for this talk. I'm also thankful to Professor Jen Riche, Professor Eleanor, Dr. Jesus, and the entire community at Oxford University. I'm also very thankful to my Dean, Mr. Shad Rizvi, Kunal, and Khalid, and all the audience here. So, connecting to Hugo's lecture, so I just want to convey few things before I start. So, what are the thoughts behind this book? So, in sociologically, one term is called denial commensality. So, in India, so people are like especially those who are from marginal sections, Dalit background, they are not allowed to have their food in a common place. So the Dalits were always served in a separate place. So this story started, so it is based on lived experiences, my own lived experience, where so I was a child. So me and my younger brother visited some of the upper caste houses where they invited us for a marriage party, but they served us in a separate place which was very unclean and very unhygienic. But my younger brother claimed we'll have the food in a common place where the all caste can sit and have their food. But the upper caste denied this story, like this incident. So they beaten my younger brother. So he was beaten by the upper caste people, and he was crying. So the story was like bloodshed thing. So suddenly I jumped into the story, and I asked the upper caste why you did this. So he tried to have food with a common place where the upper caste also having the food, but as a result you make my brother so terribly injured. So what we'll do? So in that incident, so we ask all our community fellow and just boycott this event. So but what will happen in a common place when all upper caste are dominant and they have a power relations, and all the elites they work in the home of upper caste? If they boycott this event, they will also not get their job to work in the field of upper caste. So in a power economy, so in a political economy, the Dalit ultimately lose their livelihood, daily maintenance for having their food or shelter and all those things. But when we reached our home, my mother said, my mother is no more now, but we inspired that story. Like she said, if you want to equate the upper caste, so upscale yourself in education, not boycotting these things. And also, if you upscale your education, then you can level up and you can change the scenario. So when I joined the University of Edinburgh, so I met Professor Hugo. He was very nice. He worked earlier in India, Tamil Nadu and all. He was interested in my project, so along with my postdoctoral thesis. So I proposed that we can bring a volume this book. So during that time, all COVID and all these things happened. So we used to meet at coffee shop or in a meadow. So we planned out this book. We have conducted a workshop. So from that workshop, we developed this idea how we can make this book. So I greatly supported by Hugo, not only in academically but also financially helped me a lot. So during that time also my mother passed away, so he also helped me a lot to visit India and all other things. But when I'm seeing myself here, I'm now working as a lecturer with LSST, London School of Science and Technology, with the specialization of sociology, social psychology and research methods. So I find myself really what my mother said few years back, that if you can upscale yourself in education, you can level up the upper caste. And this is my self experiences, but through this journey, so here you can see there is a place how the Dalit were served in a different place. So this has happened to me, and even when we complain about it, what we got as a consequence, we got like we're beaten up. My younger brother was injured. My younger brother is also no more. Later on, he died with a suicidal thing. Suicidal incident. So it was also perpetuated by caste. So he committed suicide. But from that day, so I started working on how caste is very prominent in human life, and especially for Dalits, how it create problem, and for upper caste, how it create privilege, network, and also a support system. So when we frame this work, so our second chapter. So basically, we worked on psychosocial violence. So we have three major contributions in this section. One is from Professor G.C. Palo. He is director of Indian Institute of Dalit Studies. So what he talks about, how caste formed in a society through a psychological violence. So his argument is, when caste perpetuated in the society, so there are some people who intentionally create a psychosocial atmosphere, that they started with slurs against Dalits, and they tempted Dalits that they should react over that. And when Dalit reacted, as a result, they do a larger incidences, like if you see about the Lathur incident in Orissa, as well as Kharlanj massacre, where Dalits were always victimized with the caste violence. The upper caste, they completely burned the Dalit hamlet in Orissa, and Lathur, they murdered many Dalits with claim that the Dalits are violent, Dalits are more abusive and all those grounds. So when this happened, if we think about the Lathur incidents, it was happened that the Dalit boy was victimized of that he theft something, and for small things, small stigmatizations, through stigmatized Dalits, they just get mileage, and they even burn the houses of Dalits, they kill the Dalits. And connecting to my own work, which I also work for my PhD as well as postdoc, even if this book, which we worked on how caste turn into affect the emotional level. So if you think the level of caste, how projected into the Dalit's life, where when the Dalit entered into the university, there is a gatekeeper, where the first and very beginning step, where the upper caste don't want that Dalit should study, because if they will study and they will share the higher education space, they'll equate the space. If you go to the Rohit Vemula's suicide, and in my study I find, so there is a channel, there is whole mafia who asks for the dominant caste that Dalits should not get educated, because if they will get educated, they will completely ruin the society as per their norm and values. So if you talk about Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarukkai, so how Dalits were branded as Sidhu, that means scheduled caste. So in India, so there is a term called scheduled caste. They were branded as Sidhu, and on the basis of their scholarship, on the basis of their affirmative action benefits, they were branded as scheduled caste, and in this connotation makes stigmatized for Dalits, and as the Dalits were not welcomed in the university space and their academic performance were not good, and later on they were facing some caste-based direct discrimination in university space. In my study, I found that Dalits were denied to get the books from the library. Dalits are not share dining in a hostel dining space, and Dalits even not share a room with upper caste in universities. So, and ultimately, if you come to the works of Dipchand, there also he found how the Dalit students get intentionally low mark due to their caste status. Similarly, happened in my study, and where the Dalits were committed suicide due to the caste challenges they face at the universities. Then coming to next chapter. So here we'll talk about how the caste is produced and reproduced in everyday life. So I'll just narrate a story of another professor from Delhi University. He himself is author, so he is from Dalit background. Even if he is a professor at Delhi University, but his stigmatized identity as Dalit professor is not gone away, and his work basically living memories of Dhoti. So his grandfather's identity as Dhoti, so which is used as a negative connotation towards Dalit. So Dhoti is a identification or marker of Dalits, that when that his grandfather used to come into public, so that Dhoti will signifies or identifies that some Dalit is coming and people will be aware of that. Similarly, Shailaja Menon also focused on how the caste is based on performance and how the Dalit labor is exploited in the everyday caste systems. Similarly, Dibya also argued how caste is restricting Dalits to entering temple. So if we talk about the Hindu social system, where if you consider Dalit into the Hindu system, so but they are not again allowed to entering the temple, even if the president of India was also not allowed to entering the temple. So this story,
1 minute to go.
okay. So this is interesting story how they were trying to argue that despite of some legal provisions, Dalits are not allowed to entering the temple. Then coming to the Raju Chadwali, so he argues how caste is a everyday space in urban settings. So on the basis of your surname, food pattern and all those things, even if you are staying in urban setting, so you are demarcated as lower caste. So you are discriminated in urban space. Then secondly, Ankita Bhatkande also argued about do not talks like others. So how you are segregated on the basis of language. So when the others said, others means the lower caste or Dalits. So Dalits always stigmatized as they don't know good language, they have inferior language, but the Brahmin have a superior language. If someone saying very fluent Sanskrit or Brahmin were fluent, so then that means they are pure, and if you are saying in very colloquial language or day-to-day everyday language, then you are branded as non-Brahmin or Dalit or lower caste, and on the basis of language you are segregated, because here the caste also works as everyday works of language. Then coming to Disha, who talks about how caste, how caste appears as intercaste marriage problem. So when someone committed doing intercaste marriage, so how caste creating much problem for them. Then the last thing is Nilima is arguing about how the economies of caste is performing in the everyday life. So Dalit always victimized in village, but Dalit wants to go to city and get rid of from the caste, city or city periphery. When they come to periphery of the city, when they work in a brick lane, again they are facing the similar problem, the caste coming as a giant caste, so which affects their life worse than the village life even. So, and this book is well afterward by Professor Surinder Jorka, who rightly defined how the caste is everyday affairs, and it produced and reproduced in daily basis, and that ultimately affects the life of the people. And connecting to this work, our future works is whether trying to work on claiming university space, and will focus on the discrimination and psychosocial experience of Dalits, how the university is open for a Dalit, whether they accommodate diverse space for all, or it is always stigmatized on the basis of caste. Thank you all for listening me, and now I'll hand over to Asan.
Yeah, thank you, Daneshwar. Thank you so much. Lot of insights, but I think for the paucity of time, I will not speak more. And invite our panelists to please join us. Yeah. Don't use any slides. Yeah, thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, thank you. Or if you can take a few more minutes, if that's fine. Yeah, please, over to you. So I'll actually introduce you. I will not rush that much. So Professor Eleanor is Emeritus Professor at the University of Warwick. Our career specialism was the ethnographic study of the UK's Hindu and Sikh communities. In 2021, she was awarded a Lifetime of Achievement Award from the University of California, Riverside, for her contribution to Sikh and Punjabi studies. She co-founded the Punjabi Research Group and the Journal of Punjab Studies, now Journal of Sikh and Punjab Studies. She's co-editor of Brill's Encyclopedia of Sikhism. She speaks mainly on Sikh studies at international conferences and in media. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us in person, and over to you.
Thank you. So congratulations to Hugo particularly, and to Daneshwar, and all the contributors to this fine volume, Caste in Everyday Life. The publication arises from the untold suffering caused by countless acts of humiliation in Indian society. As the researchers illustrate clearly, caste mutates and relocates from the village to the brick kilns and to parts of the city, and caste does not disappear, except it would seem in the perceptions of many higher caste people. Congratulations on a book that must surely deepen understanding and that will, I hope, lead to change, as Surinder Jorka suggests in his afterword that it can, however small and gradual those changes are. Currently, as we know, some writers, scholars indeed, are strenuously denying the real existence of caste, of a centuries-old indigenous pyramid. You saw the pyramid in Hugo's first slide, a pyramid of prejudice that most oppresses those at its base. Such writers attribute the concept and its imposition on Indian society to colonial administrators and missionaries. They attack Christians for exploiting caste for the purposes of conversion, and they also resent others demonizing Hinduism for supposedly creating and endorsing caste and its divisions. And like the RSS speaker who is quoted in the author's preface, such writers exhort us to forget concepts like Varna and Jati as a thing of the past. So this book is timely and to be applauded for its focus on raising readers' awareness of the current reality by reporting and interpreting rigorously researched data, empirical data. And it's presented, and I think this is a really strong point, both by Dalit and higher caste scholars and it arises from a wide range of settings in India, Orissa, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, UP, and so on, Mumbai. My hope is that their collective work really can contribute not only to exposing wrongs, but also to remedying them. For me, as a UK-based scholar, this volume provides a context for, and also a contrast to, recent and ongoing realities and struggles in the UK. I think, for example, of scholars such as Professor Meena Dhanda, who headed a project funded by the Equality and Human Rights Commission to determine an appropriate definition of caste for the UK's equalities legislation, in the effort for caste to be recognised as a protected characteristic in the 2013 Equality Act here in the UK. Professor Dhanda was faced with the caste deniers, some vocal Sikh and Hindu organisations, including influential individuals who were intent on attacking what they saw as an imperialist and Christian notion and agenda, rather than listening to the voices of those who carried the scarring from a Dalit heritage, whose own views, in fact, as it happens, were not unanimous about the need for and desirability of including caste in UK legislation. Anyway, in 2018, the UK government committed to repealing its duty under Section 9 of the Equality Act to prohibit caste discrimination. So the reliance is on case law. And so there is the possibility for caste as an aspect of race to be invoked, but caste itself is not named as a protected characteristic. But why am I concerned? As it happens, caste-based attitudes and injustices have drawn my attention over and over again, from the time when I worked in India in the 1970s, teaching in a hill station in the north, and then for the past nearly 50 years living in the British Midlands, researching the experience of Hindus and Punjabi Christians, let's not forget, and caste-related Sikh communities in Coventry and Nottingham. Caste, or at least vestiges and memories of it, also impinged, though only very slightly, on me from time to time, simply as I was living in the Midlands, and also after my marriage as part of a Punjabi family. The chapters in this splendid volume connect in various ways with my own work on caste. For instance, caste as it has related to religious education in the UK, and I could say a lot about that. And most recently, I've been looking at the situation of Christians, most of them with a Dalit heritage, in Pakistan. This book focuses on India and mainly, basically within Hindu communities, but it's important that it shows the way to further studies further afield and in other religious communities. Of course, some chapters of this present book have resonated with my own research interests in food behaviour in Hindu and Sikh communities, in mixed families, I've done quite a bit on that, and in the experience of Valmikis, hence my interest in Raju Chalwadi's chapter on Valmikis in Mumbai. And the findings of Dhaneshwar and Subhadarshi and Deep Chand are especially illuminating and harrowing in view of my own interest in caste in relation to education. Some chapters opened windows into new areas for me, for instance, the caste factor in the Marathi language, on how being a Brahmin and food branding can be related, and on the vicious cycle of exploitation, ensnaring villagers even when they move beyond the village and into the city. The book is impressive too in its range of appropriate methodology, semi-structured interviewing, focus group discussions, analysis of online material, reflection on personal experience, and the range of castes, locations and scenarios. Perhaps there is the most hopeful evidence of change in the lives of the Valmikis of Mumbai, but it is pain, affect that pervades every chapter. And that includes the frustration that well-intentioned legislation can backfire, with caste-based violence increasing, for instance, after the 2016 Prevention of Atrocities Act. So anyway, there are rays of hope in the book, thank goodness. And my congratulations again on a book that sets the tone and provides the impetus for further investigation, perhaps for example, of middle-ranking castes, of communities in other parts of India, and so on. Do caste prejudices affect telecallers as much as they affect cleaners? There are just so many more spaces in which similar high-quality investigations could take place. And I close with an incident from the Midlands where I live. And you might think it's irrelevant, but it opens a window on a slightly different society here in Britain. Some years ago, this is not her right name, Suman, a woman from a Punjabi Dalit community, the Valmiki community in the Midlands, was attending the Hindu temple, of which, as it happens, my husband was the chair of the trustees. She asked if there could be a reading of the Valmiki Ramayana. Usual practice was for the Ramayana parts, the readings, to be readings of Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas. As it happened, I previously suggested to the chairman of trustees that he read a book by a Sanskrit scholar, Dr. Julia Leslie, Authority and Meaning in Indian Religions. The book had arisen from a legal dispute in 2000 in Birmingham regarding the ancient Rishi Valmiki. He is revered as Bhagwan Valmiki by the Valmiki community, and a member of Valmiki was incensed by a higher caste presenter recounting on air the widespread story of Valmiki originally having been a daku, like a highwayman. So I think he was unaware of how hurtful Valmiki listeners would find this narrative, and Dr. Leslie was called in as an academic witness in the resulting legal action. Now, my husband read the book, and having read the book and been very affected by it, he convinced the temple committee, the higher caste temple committee, that it was right that the Valmiki Ramayana should indeed be read publicly in the Hindu mandir, breaking with precedent. So the reading of the Valmiki Ramayana went ahead, and the Valmiki woman had not been marginalised at all by the higher caste committee. Now, I mention this because it's an example of how scholarship and caste can engage with each other, and how a situation of caste conflict, in this case around a broadcast in Birmingham relating to the story of the Rishi Valmiki, how a situation of caste conflict, however big or small, can give rise to a scholarly venture, and how, in turn, a work of scholarship can then, in quite indirect and unsuspected ways, have empowering consequences, however small. And small steps, one can only hope, are incremental. So, thank you to everybody who's here.
Thank you.
Everybody online and all the organisers.
Yeah. Thank you, Elena. I would like to echo what you just said about the relevance of this book in terms of being that data set and as a monograph and inspirational for other studies, especially in diaspora. I was 5 weeks away in Australia undertaking this study to understand how discrimination was the sort of outline of discrimination in the Australian diaspora migrant community. And when I was reading the book introduction, one thing that just came to my mind was that, like, okay, when I decided to write about that field work for 5 weeks, this book will be the sort of core to sort of contribute to that sort of knowledge. Yeah, and thank you so much, Elena, for those comments. Now I invite Jens. Thank you so much for joining us again, and I'll give you a brief introduction. Professor Jens Lersch is Emeritus Professor in Agrarian and Labour Studies, Department of Development Studies at SOAS, where I did my first master's LLM when I was a field scholar. And Jens is your second time in Bailey. He came for the first time for my book launch last year in the month of May. And thank you so much for joining us again. His research interests include the political economy of agrarian transformation and class and caste relations in agrarian transition, the political economy of labor relations, unfree labor and rural labor migration, and struggles, movements, and labor organizations, and the role of INO. I can go on, but I think I'll hand over to you Jens, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Asan, and thanks for organising this. And of course, a huge thanks to the editors of the book for producing such a wonderful book and giving me a chance to talk to it. Also to all the authors that have been involved in the book. But let me start maybe by saying that when you agree to take part in a book launch, there's always some hesitation, because what you agree to is to take part in celebrating the book before you've read it. Now, so there's always, it presumes that you can gauge this will be a good book. And I can say in this particular case, certainly the book confirmed what I had expected, that this is a volume worth celebrating. And I'll do that here. I'll do that by highlighting some points why I think it's a great volume. I'll then go into a few more details of some of the many contributions in it and conclude. So I think this is a great volume for a number of reasons. Firstly, politically, it is actually a really important book, because as we already touched upon earlier, in India today, it is a political act to point out that caste oppression and discrimination actually exists, and that it has significant negative impact on those oppressed and discriminated against. And if one then adds that it's not going away, it is certainly a political act. So in fact, simply documenting that caste oppression and discrimination continue to exist is an important political act. So to the answer to the question, another volume on caste discrimination, yes, it is important in itself to do so. It goes against the prevalent dominant political view, and there's nothing new in this, in a sense. I mean, there's a long history of from Arya Samaj onwards to claim that Hindus are united against Muslims and gloss over any difference within the Hindu community. So Dalits have to be included without their position being substantively changed. Caste oppression is ignored, and that is what we see today, even more so, but it has a long tradition, really. And of course, today we see activists against caste oppression languishing in jails, and we see academic investigation of caste oppression being actively discouraged in India. Yes, this is important. If one go into the actual overall analysis that the book produces, then that is also politically provocative, at least for those that wish to ignore the existence of caste discrimination, because it points out that caste is not declining, but changing or transforming, and it does so in quite some detail. So it might be that the old feudal caste relations in villages are being rolled back, but caste oppression continues and develops in the modern society at large, in work, in education, in leisure, etc. And it is this transformed caste oppression that the book by and large focuses on in the education sector, at work, intercaste marriages and so on. So it's very much a book about caste oppression in the modern world and what it does to people in this modern world. And it shows through that very clearly that caste oppression is not declining, it is not going away, but it's changing. Theoretically, and that's the third point, the book also has a bone to pick with old Brahminical, colonial and Orientalist caste theories of castes. The book is very polite, but it's clear it doesn't find these approaches helpful, that modern day caste oppression simply cannot be reduced to religion and purity pollution. Such theories, the old theories would see caste oppression as in a final decline, but as the book shows, that is not the case, and therefore there's a major disagreement here actually. And we need to look elsewhere if we are to understand how caste oppression continues to exist and is transforming. And Hugo related to that in his introduction as well. And I also find, unsurprisingly, that the book contributes to that, to looking to these other places. And it does so in an actually quite original way, because instead of focusing on these theories, old theories, it focuses on the mundane, on the day-to-day manifestation of castes. It focuses on the banal actions, the immediate psychology of how caste has been internalized over time. So it goes from theory, high theory, to empirical reality and lived reality, and how that shapes caste and how it is being shaped by caste oppression. And such a focus is actually great. And in my view, more could have been done of this as a theoretical approach even. To me, it's quite Gramscian. I don't know, Gramsci's thinking of struggles over common sense. This is really struggles over common sense we're seeing here writ large. So I found that hugely inspiring, this shift in how to think about actually lived castes. Now, so I think it succeeds in providing excellent evidence of what caste oppression actually is today. And we need to do that, both to show that caste oppression is transforming and not going away, but also to understand what it does to the oppressed by way of humiliation, discrimination, by way of keeping people in their place. And also in what function this serves for the oppressors. And all the chapters in the volume, I think, contribute to this in each their specific way. And that makes the book stand out. I think it's quite clear from this, and it's also clear again from what Hugo said, that the volume focuses on caste oppression as a relation. Now, so this is, I think it's worth just repeating that this is not solely a book about the victims, but also about the perpetrators and that relationship, and how the caste oppression perpetrators engages in humiliating, oppressive behavior, and do so in some cases also maybe not actively, they don't feel it's active, but they just happen to benefit from their caste position. And in that sort of focusing on how caste oppression can of course be a very direct act, but it can also be something that is internalized and automatic behavior. I think we also get a better understanding of how oppression takes place, how it permeates every aspect of life. All the social relations that the book deals with, marriage, work, all social interactions, and even, as Hugo pointed out, smells and taste and markers of this. The book, of course, doesn't condone this, but it shows it. And it shows that the kind of psychological violence that it wreaks on those at the receiving end, and how the perpetrators as a group, whether they act on purpose or not, directly benefits from it. And importantly, the introduction points out that this is best understood as a power relation that sets itself through by way of being lived and performed every day. So with that, the analysis has moved away from the sole focus on purity pollution, but into power relations more generally as well. Something that the afterword by Surinder Jyotka also stress to quite a considerable extent. So this is a power relation with starkly different outcomes for the powerful and the powerless. The introduction puts it like this way, that it results, caste results in life-threatening fear for some and life-strengthening networks for others. And it points out that this takes place in new areas and new ways. It argues that caste relations have adapted to the changed realities of neoliberal economy and education system that are open to all. So caste relations ensure discrimination and oppression under these new conditions. Theoretically, the book views this as opportunity hoarding, that those in power are the ones who gain access to advantages in society. Now, this to me is perhaps an area where an even more dynamic analysis could have been developed by way of paying even more attention to how all this relates to the changing economy and changing class relations in society. That would move the analysis from a Weberian opportunity hoarding approach towards a political economy analysis of caste capitalism. And perhaps that could take it further in analyzing why caste oppression is changing. Alas, this is not what the book seeks to do, but it doesn't detract from the many reasons why it's an important book that should be read and discussed widely. Now, I would have loved to have gone through all the 12 empirical chapters of the book because they're all really great and interesting, but of course I can't. There's just no time for that. I will, though, pick a few aspects that stood up for me from what, of course, is from my perspective. Others might have picked others, but to me, those were the ones that really spoke to me. And maybe it reflects my own specializations, focusing on work, labor relations, etc., etc. But just a few of them. First, in the first couple of sections, of first parts, which relates to psychosocial violence and exclusion in education. Here, I really enjoyed the way these papers engaged with psychological aspects of caste oppression, and they did so from a social science perspective. This was not high-fluting theory, it was social science perspective on psychological aspects. And there were 3 papers that focused on the experience of Dalits in different types of education. What I particularly found very important was the way the papers by Dinosaur Boy and Deep Chand documented the routine harassment and stigmatization of university students and the severe psychological and behavioral consequences it had by way of self-doubt, depression, abandoning studies, self-harm, suicide, etc. Boy suggests that harassment, etc., is based on Dalits being A, quota students, B, future pollution, and C, plain and simple discriminations, where students from other groups get preferential treatment compared to Dalits. Whereas Chand argues that this is a trilogy of caste, reservation, and merit that are the primary source of discrimination, humiliation, and exclusion. Now, I highlight merit because maybe these are issues that also we in our university life are used to foregrounding without thinking about it. Here's a very strong argument that merit in itself also has the way it is enacted also has a clear caste perspective, also has a clear discriminatory and oppressive perspective. So I found that hugely interesting. Moving on to a couple of other papers from the section on caste stigma and subject formation and banal casteism, everyday assertion of superiorities. They cover a lot of grounds and include foci both on Dalits and Brahmins. To me, 2 issues stood out. One relate to intercaste marriages where Dalit women married non-Dalit men, the paper by Disha. The Dalit women were activists, fully aware of their position, etc. But it showed nevertheless that within the marriages there were different degrees of continued everyday humiliation and violence against the Dalit women, so, from in-laws and friends of the husband. And there was a clear difference in how equal or how patriarchal the relationship between the wife and husband were. So this ranged from hiding from the husband's family and friends that the wives were Dalits, which is extreme humiliation, and difference in how equal, to a situation where a husband openly, willingly cut off connections to anyone that would not socialize as equal with his Dalit wife, including accepting her cooked food. And the conclusion of the study was very clear, that the political act of crossing endogamy did not stabilize caste structure or guarantee castelessness. It could, perhaps, but it didn't by itself. Instead, the struggle moved on into the marriage. The other paper that I really liked was Bankande's paper on language as a means of caste discrimination, like in a sense that it spoke to me how upper caste Marathi language with its requirements of precise and specific pronunciation, rules that were essential in order, if one were to speak proper Marathi, immediately excluded Bahujans and Dalits. And how that was enacted in schools, both by teachers and by other pupils. So again, we don't need to go far outside these walls to see somewhat similar processes at work, but this was, of course, quite extreme. Finally, if there's time, just a couple of comments on the last section of the two papers there, Economics of Caste, Employment and Environment. The first paper was a brilliant paper on migrant Valmikis in Mumbai. It started in the 1970s, settling in an awful situation on an active cremation ground, really at the margins of anything, so where only subalterns would settle. But that over time had grown into a proper part of the city, a proper chawl, with proper houses, proper streets, government recognized, etc. And how today the Valmikis of this neighborhood were very proud of their Valmiki identity, as they also moved out of sanitation work. They also would not tolerate any kind of local-based caste oppression and everyday slur, and they didn't have to because of numbers and economic position. So the power relation meant they could clamp down on it whenever it happened. So this is interesting because on the one hand, Valmiki, because of their job as sanitation workers, are some of the most discriminated against people. On the other hand, of course, as in this case, though it's never said directly, it does appear that the Valmikis in the 1970s had good jobs, probably government service job, which is not uncommon among Valmikis in cities either. So strong economic position, relatively speaking, as well as extreme caste-based oppression. So it's a very it is a very specific situation we're talking about. But in this case, it had worked out very well, it seemed, for the Valmikis. The alternative to that is another, one can say, pragmatic case when it comes to work, because this is one that is always drawn to the fore. The other one is that of brick kiln workers. And here we have a story that is also really, it is a classic of that kind of stories, of the extreme oppression and exploitation of Dalits in brick kiln work, and how extreme poverty and caste oppression interacts to create the most appalling conditions possible for those Dalits, and there are no options but to do this kind of work, driven by the very bad caste discrimination and extreme poverty in their home villages. So it's a very powerful contrast and very interesting two papers, and it would be wonderful to see that developed further into a study also of other kind of works that are not, so we have the extremes here, what is in between, what are the other occupational contexts, how does everyday oppression and discrimination pan out in other jobs that are sort of between these two extremes that we're seeing here. Okay, that's for me really. This, just to repeat, I find it a politically very important book. It deserves wide readership. I very much enjoyed reading it, and I'm sure others with interest in caste discrimination and oppression will do so. So congratulations once more to the editors and all the contributors for this.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. I'll hold off my own comments. Thank you, first of all, for that very comprehensive review of the book, and I know that you wanted to sort of speak more, and I promise I'll give you more time next time. Coming to Dr. Jesus, We are still short on time, but then I'll just introduce very quickly Dr. Jesus. And again, my humble apologies at the first instance of not getting your name pronunciation correct. I apologize for that. Is a historian from Mexico and a lecturer in history of race and ethnicity at the University of Manchester. He studies the intellectual and political connections of the global south, especially in India and Mexico during the 20th century. So over to you, Dr. Jesus, and thank you so much for joining us online.
Hi, thank you. How much time do I have?
About 12 minutes. 12 minutes.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Well, there's not, I mean, I'm going to keep it brief, I guess. Well, thank you first to Hugo, to Asang, and to Naneshwar for inviting me. I'm not sure, like, why they decided to invite a historian, because I come from a very different perspective, and when I started to read the book, like, I kept making sort of like connections between history and what was being said. This book, I think, does many things very well. First, it explains how we can understand caste and untouchability in a new way, and that made me think about how in the 90s, someone like Stuart Hall, based on Apaya, was thinking about how the language of race has been moved and moving to kind of like the language of genetics. So how like the goalposts kept moving on in that sense. So this is a good sort of introduction into the new ways in which we can study caste and in the new ways in which we can speak about caste. That's one thing that it does really, really well. The second thing that this book does really well, it's bringing into question whether we should move away from textual understandings of caste. And I like the theoretical ideas and the theoretical analysis that is being done. And here I have two comments. As you may know, like, I work on the intellectual history of Ambedkar, and I published a book about it. And I think Ambedkar, and at the time when Ambedkar was writing, sociology as a discipline and anthropology as a discipline were sort of like developing in India. And the main understandings of caste and the main sort of like points of comparisons that we have even now come from that period. And that period was based specifically on the knowledge of intellectuals that use their education in Sanskrit as kids, as children, to sort of explain to the world what caste and untouchability were about. And what I find interesting about this is that this book comes from a perspective in which those ideas are being challenged. And that is great. I think the way in which it's being done, by doing surveys, by doing a specific sort of questionnaires that try to give voice to questions of affect, and the way people from low-caste groups or Dalits feel it's an important element. But in another sense, I think also that the way in which a specific textual concepts that were taught by the first generation of sociologists and anthropologists in India, whether it's Guru or whether it's Srinivas, are taking a different language, but the comparison is there. And I'll try to explain this in two ways. First is, if we think of the life of Ambedkar and his writings, when we think about education, I a lot of the chapters in this book are actually about how education is sort of prevented or is tried to be, how Dalit children or Dalit students are prevented to access knowledge. And in some way, this is what Ambedkar was criticizing at some point, and the way in which he wrote about sort of not being allowed taking Sanskrit when he was trying to do his BA. So, and how Dalits were not allowed to listen to the Vedas, and how if a Dalit was caught listening to the Vedas, like they needed to put lead in their ears and so on. So my point is that as a historian, when I see this new language coming in, I also see like there are connections in which not everything is sort of separated or divided. There are connections that between the text and between the way in which caste is still changing. But if we look into larger concepts or larger questions such as knowledge or knowledge production, there is some point of analysis there. Another thing that I wanted to discuss about this book and the way it's really done very well is the way these voices are presented, and perhaps like the most recent thing in which how universities and knowledge production is sort of being kept from Dalits, or at least Dalits are being sort of questioned about how they access and how they're kept in place and how they access and which questions they can ask. It came just recently from this meeting with Spivak and Anshul Kumar in JNU. I mean, what happened afterward was it's something that I cannot comment on. I think like the responses were not great, but the situation that happened at JNU, that for many sort of scholars, uppercut scholars, they try to explain how this is being misinterpreted. The chapter on Vivas, on Viva Voce examinations, and the chapter on how these microaggressions can be perceived in higher education in India are very relevant. It shows that these are not isolated events. It shows that these are day-to-day occurrences, right? Okay, this is are like the main bits that I want to sort of discuss that are done quite well. The things for the future, I think, that are also being done really well is the way in which we focus on food, which I think is the point in which there could be more work in the future. And why do I say this? I say this because the first part of the affect sort of lived experience, we've seen in many different ways. Whether we think of Dalit literature, we have seen that lived experience. Whether we see it in the way Gopal Guru has worked on questions of humiliation, we understand that there is a bit, that is an actual problem, and that we need to understand how that humiliation comes about. What I think we need to also do at some point, but of course this is part of the larger problem of gatekeeping and knowledge production, is to make way for Dalit scholars to challenge these knowledge productions made by Brahmins and or upper caste people, and their own perceptions of how they see themselves. So this is something that Ambedkar struggled when he was doing his own work, and I've written about his own sort of how we may think of Ambedkar as a sociologist or an anthropologist. And the difficulty of this is, as we've seen, if we think of a Dalit anthropologist trying to get into sort of like the Brahmin area of the village, we have a problem. Probably they're not going to be accepted into a Brahmin household. Probably they're not going to be accepted they're not going to be accepted to ask specific questions. They are going to be probably under physical threat and so on. So all of these things, I know it's very hard to do, but we also need to see like the next generation, and I think this is a great way of starting, of Dalit scholars sort of challenging that knowledge production. And I think Hugo has done a great way supporting people like Suryakant, people like Daneshwar, Suraj has also been doing these writings about it. And I think actually there's a big spring of Ambedkar societies in the UK, which I'm really excited about. So I think that is the next step. And I think that is something that perhaps like the book does not discuss a lot, but I understand why it doesn't do it. But I think like in the future, maybe that's an area to explore. So I'm going to stop there because I know like we're running out of time and I actually might leave soon. Thank you. No, thank you and congratulations again.
Yeah, thank you, Jesus. Thank you so much for those insights. Yeah, got it. So thank you. I think we still have time, about 5 to 10 minutes for quick Q&A. I know that a lot of people have been waiting and want to ask so many questions. So before we go into the Q&A, I would like to have my own closing. Actually, we'll do the Q&A and then I will have my own closing remarks. So the floor is now open for the audience in person here, and of course, chat options as well. So first, I think if you would like to if you could like first, please keep your questions to like maximum 30 seconds. I know that you would want to elaborate, but that's very important, so that we can give as many people chance as much as we can. And I will be then monitoring the chat option as well. So the floor is now open.
To whom we want to ask the question?
Huh?
To whom we want to ask the question?
Yeah, and please also say that to whom do you want to ask the question as well. Thanks. So everyone can read. Yeah. So, do you have any questions?
Hello everyone. First of all, Jai Bhim to all.
Jai Bhim.
Yeah. So my question is to Professor Charez. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. I recently, just yesterday, I was going through the article as mentioned in the chat box for my review of literature that I'm building around anti-caste movement and Dalit, specifically Dalit feminist theories that I want to conceptualize within mainstream academic discourse that I'm working on right now. So your article is very much relevant to further build my arguments, further in order to dismantle and also understand the Brahminical, the politics of knowledge production per se, with regard to the Brahminical lens that is very much relevant and overwhelmingly it's dominating in this discourse that we are continuously time and again are trying to highlight the anti-caste movement, the anti-caste thinkers. So one of the classical texts that I can think of right now is by Mahatma Phule, Ghulam Giri, where he blatantly and very clearly highlighted the 3,000 years of Brahminical tyranny that has been taking place, as using language as a tool that has always been the oppressor's tool to maintain their hegemony. As that one way of looking at that is that, and also as one of the authors or one of the speakers rightly mentioned about the Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci and his concept of common sense, that can very much that we can use that concept to understand how the politics of Brahmanism is working in our everyday lives. Gopal Guru's work that talks about how caste makers, the different markers of caste. But I want to understand, and if I want to negotiate around my understanding of how the discourse between organic intellectuals and traditional intellectuals and the hypocrisy which is there in the academia, where in the mainstream, the subaltern voices or the subaltern theories with regard to anti-caste movements, anti-caste pedagogy that is there, it has been pushed to the periphery. It is not in the mainstream academia. So, because since my childhood, I have only been looked at Gandhi as one of the, the leaders of the nationalist movement. But no one talks about the darker side. No one talks about Gandhi being an upper caste, being a strong supporter of Hinduism, which Baba Saheb had blatantly. He went beyond that religion and accepted Buddhism as one of his religion. So I want to understand how Dalit feminism writings are still in the periphery. Starting with, you had clearly mentioned, I'm not able to pronounce the name right, the first Dalit woman scholar, the PhD scholar that you had mentioned in your article, who critiqued M.N. Srinivas, calling him an upper caste man who had a political gaze in his work. And then following with Savitri Bai Phule, Mukta Salve.
So Apeksha, sorry to cut you there. Could you please keep your question please short? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying. I have so much to say, so I'm just trying to collate everything.
That, yes.
Just give me 1 minute to sort of conclude my question. The writings of Sharmila Rege and now Sunaina Arya, who is coming with an Dalit feminist standpoint, and because how again, like, women's movement can also be critiqued because it has always been seen with a lens of upper caste women. Savarna feminism can be critiqued. So how do I then, or as scholars, to negotiate this space where these writings are systematically being moved into the periphery? I hope I made sense. I'm so sorry.
No, thank you so much for that question. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like it's hard to, it's a very complicated question for me to answer in 2 minutes, but but to be honest, you just need to engage with what you're reading and sort of like bring it to the center. I mean, you just have to be sort of aware that and the problem with academia is that we need to speak a certain language, and I think like this book does that really well. It brings like Bourdieu, it brings Gramsci, it brings Guru, and it sort of shows that the authors and the editors of this book sort of can navigate this space, right? But the downside of that is that subaltern studies was also built on Gramsci, on Bourdieu, and so on. So it could also, that sort of language and that sort of like theoretical ideas could also be used to protect and to decenter Dalit scholarship. I guess this is I'm going to leave it at that, just like for you to think and see what you can do, because it's hard to explain more.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we can take like final 2 questions. Yes.
Okay, so I got one question for Dr. Dhaneshwar about that. What are the being first generation learner of the community, smashing the Brahminical patriarchy and the brutal casteism facing from the own villages, the way he cited from the ground. How he managed to, what are his sort of struggles, since the beginning to doing postdoc in one of the most prestigious universities of the world, Edinburgh, and coming as an author. So what is sort of his brief experience to encourage the upcoming generation who are seeing him as an inspiration in the community?
Yeah.
Just 1 minute. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Arun. So you have nicely argued a question that how the first generation students can capitalize the education as a means of emancipation. Like if you think about the Ambedkar, his famous slogan is educate, agitate, and organize. So, and if you put Ambedkar as a symbol, so we also held this program under the banner of Ambedkar, Oxford Ambedkar initiatives as well as Oxford University. But I can say when the students are more determined and try to make a change themselves through education, that really helps. So one of my recent articles also argues about creating cultural capital. If you can capitalize education as a tool to change the society, that really helps to establish yourself. So if you think about all students, starting from that Government of India scholarship to later on the higher education fellowship, which helps them to study and excel themselves in their life and attain the achieved status. For the least, they don't have any ascribed status, but they can do achieved status through education. It's not working for all, but due to the caste code, caste performance, but still it has some impact, even if for a few. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So final question, there's a question for you, Hugo, in the chat. So I'm not going to raise it because I think it's already been marked to you. So I'll come to Dr. Shrikant Borkar from Royal Holloway University for the final question. So over to you, Shrikant, Dr. Shrikant, and please requesting you to keep it short. Thank you. So we can't hear you.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for such a wonderful program. I would like to ask a question to Professor Eleanor Nisbet. I have been following her. I have used her literature in my dissertation and my book and all over. I have observed one thing, that she never fails to mention her marriage to a man from Indian Punjabi priest class. I mean, this practice of reflexivity and mentioning one's social location or political position, it is considered as one of the best practiced in anthropology and social sciences. My question is that why Indian social scientists, anthropologists and sociologists, why they shy away from this particular practice? I haven't come across many people, those who are writing on caste and oppression and so-called anti-caste movement. They do this thing, they follow this practice. I don't know why.
Thank you for your comment. In fact, a lot of what I wrote and did was before I was part of a Punjabi family. And I probably wasn't always transparent, or I think, like many people, I would expose part of my background that I thought was relevant and not other parts. I think what is good in my lifetime anyway is seeing that there is more emphasis on transparency, but I'm also aware of the reasons why some scholars reach the decision that they must withhold certain aspects of their identity or their experience in certain situations. And I think we just have to go on working on this. And one of the things which I think is extremely important is reflexivity, and how, as we conduct research, we change our perception of ourselves. And some anthropologists have actually shared that experience of the personal change that they undergo in relation to their heritage and their context and so on. Sometimes their studies almost become a sort of autoethnography, which is more focused on them than it is on the field, and one can argue about that. Yes. Also, I think it's really important to see how the research one carries out impacts on the field, and how the identities of those who are being researched amongst may change. And I could narrate various things from my own work in that regard, where I've met somebody perhaps 10, 20 years after doing the research, and they have happened to make an observation about how actually it changed their relationship to their education or their religious identity. So the responsibilities of the scholar are multiple, and we can't explicitly deal with all of them in every piece of work, but we just have to hope that we're working with integrity.
Thank you so much, Professor. So I'm going to now wrap up because you're already 15 minutes over the scheduled time. And just two quick comments. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining us. Despite still 34 people who have joined us online, I think most of them are based in India. Still, I know it's very late and of course, everyone joining us here, the discussants and of course the presenters. Two sort of comments that comes from my own position as a doctrinal lawyer here, that the relevance of this book shouldn't be only limited to academics, but I think, and this is sort of a request to you, Hugo and Nareshwar as well, like I think every Supreme Court of India judge should read this book. This reason is because when I read those judgments, so my project looks at the 75 years of jurisprudence and what is going on in that, and the issue of castelessness and the anti-reservation rhetoric, the anti-caste rhetoric, which is mostly coming from the upper caste Supreme Court judges, deny the existence of caste discrimination. I will not go into citing some judgments, that's not. And the second thing is about the relevance of this book for activism outside of academia. And I would like to echo with what the discussants have said here as well, that how university students will find the arguments, the evidences provided in this book very helpful to do the sort of political fight that happens in university spaces. And a quick example, when I went to my law school in New Delhi, the National Law University in Delhi, the first day I found my hostels were segregated based on caste. And fighting that for 2.5 years, we ended that process, but I really wish if we had these sort of, and then still people denied that, no, there's no problem in segregating because it's all about merit. So just two final comments from me, and I would like to thank everyone for joining us. And I hope that you would have received this email about the other programs that we're going to do at Dr. Ambedkar, Oxford Ambedkar Initiative based out of Imperial College. Thank you so much, and Jai Bhim. Thank you.